You're listening to What It's Like with Luce, a podcast highlighting ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm your host Lucy Norris, and on today's episode, I'm chatting to founder of Saluto London, a clothing brand curating vintage womenswear and upcycling one-of-a-kind creations from textiles that would have otherwise gone to landfill. This week's guest is a prime example of how life doesn't always turn out the way you expect it to. Beginning her career journey chasing a job at a magazine, she worked a total of 13 internships to get her dream role, only to discover it wasn't quite what she'd been hoping for. At a loss as to what to do next, it was a trip to one of the biggest vintage fairs in London that made the penny drop. A sort of love at first sight, she realised she needed to be working with vintage clothing and started buying and selling unique pieces to her friends. What started as a tiny operation turned into a full-scale online store and soon a studio in the centre of the city. To share how she did it, here's what it's like to be Hannah Stacpoole. Welcome, Hannah. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. How I want to kick this off, if you don't mind, taking me all the way back to the very beginning and just chatting a bit about where your initial interest in fashion and the fashion industry came from.
Of course. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I feel like everyone says this, but I mean, it kind of goes way back. And I think it's not fashion. I think it's been like it's like style. My mother grew up in Italy, and her mum was living there when I was a child, and we would go out to her house quite a lot, which is in beautiful Lake Como, and it was just this house full of old things. Like there was just stuff. I mean, my granny was like a total hoarder, and I mean, is still a total hoarder, but was just stuff everywhere. And I think I became really fascinated with like all these old clothes and things like that. And I think my mom is very creative, so she used to be an interior designer, and I think I've always kind of looked up to her. So I think as a child I spent a lot of time kind of like looking at her outfits and the things that she was doing, and I think like creatively that inspired me quite a lot as a child. And then I mean, fashion, I feel like I've always kind of loved it. So I mean, at school I did like textiles and I really enjoyed it. But there was a bit of a kind of hiccup. So, I mean, I did it at GCSE, and basically my school made a bit of an error where they taught us the wrong syllabus. So we all did very badly in our GCSE exams, which was kind of quite a big blow because I thought I would have gone on to do like textiles, and then I would have probably gone to fashion like college after that. And obviously I kind of had to do a bit of a like turnaround because I knew that I wouldn't get into somewhere really good. That saying though, now I actually don't think me doing a different route has actually I think it's actually been a good thing. So yes, I kind of like diverted completely away from fashion, and I went on to do a philosophy degree, which is completely different. And I just kind of thought, oh, you know, maybe I'll go and do something instead, like law, or I thought about going into the police. And then I mean, I remember my mum always was like, no, come on, like, you know, you might not go into like a design route, but there are other routes in fashion that you could look into. So I basically went into kind of doing, I worked for this shoe brand called Meester in London. So I did that in my uni summers, and I kind of just fell into this through them because I guess as an intern, you're kind of doing lots of different things. They kind of were like, we think you're best at this. So I kind of went down the like writing and like content creation and social media route. So I worked for them in my uni summers, and then came out of uni, and I did magazine work. So I mean, within that industry, you move around a lot when you start, and I think people always get so surprised by this, but I mean, I think I did 13 internships before I got my first job.
Wow.
Which is crazy, and I know that it's changed now. I mean, all of those were pretty much unpaid, which is hard. Like, you know, it's really, it's tough. And, you know, like I worked in Selfridges on the weekends to kind of keep me going. And it was tough work. But yes, I did 13 internships to get to my first job. And I remember thinking when I got my first position, I just was like over the moon, and I was so excited. And I thought, you know, that's it, but like, you know, I've done it now, it's fine. And I basically got there and I absolutely hated the job. And it's quite weird when you've worked so hard for something and then you get there and you're like, oh God, this is not right at all. So I remember the editor that I was working for sat me down and she was like, I feel like I know that, like, I don't even know you that well, but I feel like I know that this is not right. And I think you know that it's not right. So I kind of stepped away. I was like, you know, I need to think about what it is I actually want to do. And I guess, again, like my mum was like, you know, just because you haven't been to like fashion, like you've done a degree in fashion, it doesn't mean you can't do something more creative. And I had always been really interested in vintage clothes, particularly because I feel like as a child I'd like spent hours like rummaging through my granny's cupboards and all this kind of stuff. And I remember I went to this big fair in London, which is like the best vintage fair in London, and my friend had told me about it, and I walked in and it just clicked, and I was like, this is what I was meant to do. Like, I love this, and I love the stories behind things and the history and everything. So I basically started kind of buying vintage and then selling it onto like friends and stuff. So I started like really small, and like friends would come to me and say, oh Hannah, like I really need a dress for this party, and I'd go and find them something. And then I think at the time I had just had a kind of like an admin job that I was doing to just kind of like pay the bills and work out what it is I want to do. And then it's kind of just gone from that. And, you know, like I did it for kind of, I would say, so I was working for a year and a half before I managed to make it my full-time job. But it's kind of just, it's been a real kind of, what I say to people, because I mean, people now come to me and they're like, oh, you know, how have you done it? Like, how have you managed to create a business from something that, you know, you've loved and whatever? And it's been a real kind of testing the water kind of thing. So like, you know, and actually with vintage things, and I also kind of upcycle pieces from vintage textiles. It's been a kind of just a real learning curve, and by, you know, testing things you learn what works and what doesn't, which with the nature of kind of starting a small business, I guess is great because you can afford to do that. You know, it's not like if you're creating kind of a really big fashion design business, you know, there's so much risk in getting it wrong. But it's kind of just been you know, I've just had to spend a lot of time you know, perfecting what it is that works and what doesn't, and learning, you know, who my customers are. And yeah, so I mean, now I've been doing it for just over 2 years. And yeah, so it's now my full-time job. I'm about to move into a new office, which is very exciting. And yeah, so that's kind of where it's all kind of, it's been a bit of a, I would say it's not exactly been a direct line straight down one path. It's been a bit of a kind of curvy one, but yeah, no. So that's kind of how I got into doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah, that's quite the story. And I think it's amazing how you were saying there that you had to do 13 internships to get to where you are. I always find it so incredible to hear, you know, what actually goes on behind the scenes in, say, like the magazine industry, or in trying to break into that. People never realize how much hard work and time you have to put into it. And so you've done these 13 internships, you finally got to the job that you thought would be, you know, what you'd work for, where you wanted to sit in, and then you decided, or it just didn't click with you. So how did you, I suppose, bounce back in that moment without sounding too dramatic? Because, you know, you put so much time into this direction, so like working for free, as you said, and then you kind of had to pivot and figure out what it was that you did want. So what was your mindset like at that time?
I mean, don't get me wrong, I was I was a state for about 2 months, and I remember just being really like, I just was in a really bad place. And then like, you know, like my boyfriend broke up with me, and I just remember just
Oh,
being complete like miserable, like I just was in a state for about 2 months, and it took time. I mean, so after that job where I realized it was kind of like when I was like, hey, this is wrong and I need to stop this, I went and worked for someone else for a little bit, and it was better, but it still wasn't, like right, because I mean, I'm not in a position where I can just, like as most of us can't, we can't just step away from work and be like, I need time to think, because you have
yeah.
to pay the bills at the end of the day. So I worked somewhere else for a bit of time, and again, it was just that moment when my boss then sat me down and she was like, you need to do something more creative. I'm like, I know, but I don't know how to do it. And it's quite, I mean, I'd say like, you know that moment where I thought, okay, no, now I'm going to just, actually step away and just get like an admin job, and just kind of basically work out what it is exactly that I want to do. It takes time. And, for example, like when I left, I thought that I wanted to set up a kind of a ready to wear brand. So I thought I wanted to produce clothes, from scratch and manufacture in a factory. And I went through all my files the other day, and like all of my, design packs are like miles away from what I do now. Like it's totally different. And I think, when people have come to me and they because, like I do get like young girls being like, have you done, how have you managed to do it? And I say that the biggest like advice I give to people is just take your time, like don't rush into things and don't get overly stressed about things. Because I think for me, it's been when I've stepped back and been like, okay, like think about it, like stop panicking, stop, like, you're still young, you've got time, then things have like moved on and happened.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And I think there's so much pressure as well, just from like the way the world works now and all this kind of hustle culture and things like that, to make things happen overnight and then, have all these amazing results so quickly to show for it. So I think that's a really sound piece of advice you just gave there. And so you kind of walked into that vintage fair and you just knew like this was the space for you. This is what you're passionate about. But going a bit more into the nitty gritty details of how you then turned it into Saluto London, which is your business. Can you take me back to that time? I know that you started off slowly selling pieces to friends and things like that, but the moment when you really put that business cap on and set out to become an entrepreneur in this space and set up your own business.
So I think, which is really, it's a really odd thing, but I mean, lockdown for me was the best thing that could have ever happened to my business. And I feel really guilty saying that because like, I know that some people have, it's been something that's like destroyed their business. But I think, I'd been doing it obviously on the side of a job. I'd done a couple of like fairs in London, and it had been fine, but it hadn't been like, I wouldn't say it had been, this is that, that feeling where you're like, this is right. And I started doing these, I think because lots of people were sitting on their phones. People were on Instagram, people were looking, and I started doing these virtual fairs, and that's what really like kicked things off. And like I had gone from maybe selling, maybe like 30 things a month to 30 things a week, because people were just like, I think it's the thing of people being able to find you, because obviously as a small business, you can't spend loads of money on advertising and things like that. So it is quite tricky for people to find you. And I did these kind of virtual vintage fairs, and which are now these kind of amazing things. So two of my actually really great friends have set up this thing called a virtual vintage market, and it's absolutely brilliant. And they've got traders from all over the world. It's incredible. And they do these kind of virtual fairs. I think they normally do them once a month. But it was kind of people discovering the brand. And also secondly, I mean, having, had that problem at school where I basically had to just pack up everything and, not, I had obviously sewn a bit, but I basically taught myself retaught myself to sew last year. And that was a huge thing for the business, because I started like upcycling things, and that for me is my biggest seller. Which is weird, because having looked back, if I had looked at it a year ago, or I mean 2 years ago now, I would have said, oh, I actually can't sew. Whereas now I spend most of my day sewing. Do you know what I mean? So it's been like testing the water, you know, like I did these kind of collars, for example, last year, which I made out of vintage fabrics. And being able to be kind of transparent and open on Instagram, I just put one of these collars up on Instagram and they kind of completely blew up. And next thing I know, I'm like selling, you know, I've got a store in Japan asking me if I can sell them to the store in Japan, and it just went completely mad. And that was me being able to just test the water with one product, put a picture on Instagram, see whether people like it or not, and then, you know, and then it works. So then you do loads of them, you know, you can make tons of them. So it's kind of, I think being able to work on a small scale and also being able to be quite transparent and having like a slow fashion business is, you know, is a real benefit.
Do you think that nowadays small businesses can survive without a strong social media presence? Or do you think the strength of your social media presence will dictate how well you do?
I mean, it's really, I think it depends on what kind of business, but I know that like I get all my kind of statistics and stuff at the end of the month where like my sales have come from like 99% of my sales come through Instagram. So I don't think I would be able to do this full time if I didn't have if I didn't use Instagram.
Yeah, it's mad when you think about it like that, isn't it? I just think it's such a powerful, there's so many different arguments about social media and all that kind of thing, but you can't deny how much of a powerful selling tool it is. But yeah, sorry, go on.
It's really tough. Like I always say this to my friends, I actually hate social media. I'd really rather not do it. Like I love just like, and actually that's why I'm now moving into this new studio, and obviously I will keep on doing the social media because you have to do it, but you know, you're expected to be present all the time, and it's also quite difficult to kind of switch off, do you know what I mean, because your
Yeah.
phone is just constantly going. And you know, one of my customers the other day was like, oh, it's so nice because you always reply to my messages so quickly. And I'm like, I don't really have any other option. Like,
Yeah.
you know, if my phone rings, I have to reply to the message. So it's amazing. And like, but then, you know, I always think a lot of people recently, and it's awful, like have had loads of hacking issues, so their accounts have just been deleted. And I don't think it's great to rely entirely on, and that's always at the kind of back of my mind, like if suddenly someone just managed to hack into my account and delete it, and I wasn't able to recover it, you know, I'd lose 99% of my sales. You know, I don't think it's good to just purely rely. You know, obviously it's a great thing, and I love it because I've been able to connect with people, as I said, like all over the world. And you know, it's a free marketing tool at the end of the day. But I don't think it's good relying on it. And there's also lots of like bad things that I think can come from social media.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a scary thought when you talk about the hacking and stuff like that, how much work you've put into something to just have it taken away from you. That would absolutely terrify me. Um, and so in terms of entering into the space in the beginning, um, did you ever worry about competition? Did you ever think about, you know, how you were going to find your place in the market in terms of selling vintage clothes and things like that? Or did you just kind of blocked out everything else, didn't even think about it and just went and do your own thing?
I think it's competition is a really tough one, because the other thing is that obviously, like, I set up my business like pre-lockdown. I've been doing it for, you know, a year or so, and lots of people, because they realize that, you know, anyone can do it from home, and it's an easy way to make, you know, even if it's just a hobby, like it's an easy way to make a bit of extra cash. I think lots of people have started doing it, so they've set up like an Instagram page and selling vintage clothes. And I know a lot of people, like in other traders that are friends of mine, like, you know, people do get worried about competition, but you know, at the end of the day, like I have to think that you know, anyone could set up a vintage business, like that's absolutely fine. But the thing about Saluto is that it's my eye, and unless someone has literally stood next to me when I'm sourcing my stock and like taking things from my hand, like it's never going to be exactly the same. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
yeah.
it's all the things that I feel like, because I hand pick and choose everything, it's things that I love and I think I would wear. And like I always joke that it's basically how I've cured a really terrible shopping habit, because now I can buy things that are like not my size too. So it's a really, I mean, it's a really difficult one. But I mean, I would hope that my things are, you know, that I hope that I don't look exactly the same as everyone else. And I think especially now that I'm trying to move into doing a lot more of the reworked things, so like making pieces from vintage fabrics, you know, that's, I think the designs, and I'm releasing a kind of, I'm launching a big collection in 3 weeks time of dresses. I think it, you know, they're all one of a kind pieces because they're all made from vintage sheets and curtains and things like that. I don't think anyone really, I think someone could do similar, but it's never going to be the same.
Why didn't you go on, say, Depop or something like that? Or what was it about that avenue? Because, you know, when you're talking there about how it is really popular for people to start, I know it's different in the fact that they can sell their own clothes or things like that. It's kind of a little bit of a different take. But against platforms like that, how did you feel about going into that space as opposed to just going on Depop and selling your things there?
I think for me, like the reason why I kind of wanted as well to start doing this like as a business is I felt that there was a real gap in the market for things kind of being done, having come from someone who like I've worked in a background that, you know, I'm dealing with luxury fashion essentially. So like I worked at Harrods for a year, and I personally think shopping should be about an experience, and which is why I take so much time in kind of, you know, like fixing things and wrapping them beautifully and making sure my customers are happy. And, you know, that's another reason why I'm moving into this studio, because I want customers to be able to come and have a really special experience. And like, I think basically the most important thing about sustainability in fashion is just loving what you have. And if you love it that much, like you'll never, if it breaks, you'll fix it. If it, you know, you'll really look after it and you'll keep it for a long time. And I think that is how we can be sustainable in fashion. And I think Depop, you're never going to be able to kind of communicate that kind of, and even though recently it's been a virtual experience, I think you can't really, I think it's the personal thing. Like I really like speaking to my customers and having that relationship with them. And I don't think you can really do that through something like Depop.
Yeah, I suppose it's almost like that third party that's kind of getting in the way or not letting the communication flow when you have your own space. Um, and I think it's incredible that you've got a studio now. That sounds like it's going to be so exciting, especially now everything's open again. So I suppose with that in mind, your studio and the new collection that you've just mentioned there, what does the future hold for Saluto? What are your plans for the next few months and years?
So I'm moving into my studio at the end of this month, and I really want to make it kind of a really fun, open space where people can come in with their friends. You know, it's all by appointment. So you know, and I've just made a partnership with a kind of a drinks brand, so they can have a drink, like enjoy themselves. And I think people get quite scared of vintage. I think they kind of think that it's either like rails of really smelly, like dirty, dusty, moth-holed clothes, whereas like actually I think if you present it really beautifully, I think they're actually nicer than shopping new. So I really want to, I'm kind of honing in on kind of the experience, and I want people to actually come and like do the shopping in person. And then with this reworked piece kind of collection that I've done, we're kind of focusing on that. So I've actually just taken someone else on who used to be a garment technologist at ASOS. So we are working together. And yeah, we're just, you know, it's basically I'm trying to work out how I can kind of, obviously with the vintage pieces, you know, it's a limited resource, you know, you're never, you know, it's kind of luck essentially how you find things. And I'm trying to work out how I can make a product that like a lot of people can access, and you know that we can make different sizes and it's still sustainable, it still feels luxurious, and you know essentially anyone can buy it, because obviously the other thing is with vintage is a lot of the sizes are so tiny. These rework pieces I'm doing up to a size 22, so you know I want to be able to, you know, basically provide people with an experience of special clothes that they can keep forever. I mean, that's always been the thing that I have kind of, as I said, is my kind of core business value, is that I want to provide special pieces to people that they love and look after, and that, you know, they, like my mum's passed on certain pieces to me that I'll keep forever. And, you know, if I ever have children, I'll pass them on to them. I hope people will do the same with my pieces.
That's incredible. And I love to hear, even from the beginning of this conversation, where you started out to opening your own studio. And that sounds so exciting. All the little, I think the details that you're putting into it are just going to make it a really special experience, as you said there. So that's so cool. Congratulations. I think that's absolutely amazing. And now looking back at the whole journey from where you're standing today, I suppose, do you have maybe a moment, or maybe it's a collection of moments, that you would describe as the biggest challenge you overcame in setting up this business?
I think the biggest challenge that I think, I mean, running a small business when it's just you, I'd actually say the biggest challenge is patience.
Oh yeah.
And it's it's honestly, you have to be so patient, and you know it's really hard. And like, you know, when I say blood, sweat and tears, there has been blood, sweat and tears, and you know there are, I'd say that days are either amazing or they're awful. There's never a kind of middle ground. But I think the thing that I would say is that, like, if you genuinely really love what you do and you are passionate about it, you will succeed. You know, it will be fine. If I didn't love what I do, I would have given up this like 2 years ago. I would have called it quits, because you know it's hurdle after hurdle. But I don't think there's been a kind of, I wouldn't say there's been a moment. I think as soon as I decided to do this full time, I feel like the risk, you know, the level of me getting anxious about taking risks has just kind of, I think you've just got to take that hurdle. And then, you know, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I hope I can do this forever. I might not be able to, but you've just got to take things like day by day. And yeah, if you love it and you genuinely believe that, you know, you are passionate about your product and you're passionate about your customers, I think you'll probably be fine. But yeah, no, there's a lot of late nights and a lot of tears and a lot of hard work, but it's been 100% worth it. You know, I started this business from what was in, you know, my back pocket. Like, I bought one dress and sold it, and then, you know, bought 2 more dresses and then sold them, and then, you know, I've managed to build that into a space where I now do have, you know, an office, and I've got someone now like working for me like for half the week. And yeah, it's like an amazing feeling, but more so that just because like I get to do what I love doing, and no day, like no matter how hard the work gets, like no day ever really feels like work. You know, I've never got that, you know, I mean, lots of people get it when you have that just dread feeling where you're like, oh, I don't want to go to work. I haven't had that since the day that I left my last job. So yeah, but it's no, it's really exciting. And if you're ever in London, you'll definitely have to come and visit.
Yes, 100%. I really want to see it. And so I just have one more question. And I feel like you've kind of answered this along the way, but I just want to ask it to you anyway, I suppose, to wrap everything up. If I put your 10-year-old self in front of you today, having been through all the twists and turns that you've shared with me to get to where you are now, what's the biggest piece of advice, if you had to just say one thing to that 10-year-old self moving forward?
If you genuinely believe in it, tackle any hurdle, no matter what it takes. Just get over it, essentially. Yeah, I would say that. I mean, my friend, I say this to my friends and they think it's ridiculous, but do you know what I mean by those kind of inflatable things with arms that are outside car garages that are like
Yeah,
way
the ones that like,
out?
yeah, float in the air.
Yeah, you know, if you like knock them over, they'll spring back up again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like one of those has
Oh, that's
literally
like
gone
the
down
best analogy I've heard. I love that.
like 100 times, but every time you just spring back up and you're like, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's okay. Which often I say with like tears down my face, like, it's fine, it's okay. But it is fine and it is okay. And you just have to be tough. Like, you just have to. And I'm lucky, like I am quite a tough person. And I think if I wasn't like that, I wouldn't, yeah, as I said, I wouldn't be sat here right now talking to you. But it's like, you know, you've just got to say to yourself, it's going to be, you know, work hard and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's so true because I think there is a big belief nowadays that, again, just from looking at people online, it's an overnight success. It's easy. You know, you just have to pick an idea and then it will just happen. But that's why I think it's so important to keep having the conversations that, no, you actually do have to work for what you want and it will be so rewarding in the end. But don't be, you know, disillusioned by the amount of work that you have to put in. But you do get amazing rewards, as you've demonstrated with this chat today and with the business that you've built. So thank you so much, Hannah, for joining me. I really appreciate it, and I've loved hearing everything you've gone through along the way.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been lovely chatting.
Thank you so much for listening, and as always, please rate, share and leave a comment if you like what you hear. And don't forget to follow @WhatIt'sLikePod on Instagram and Facebook. To find out more about Hannah and Saluto, or to book a private appointment for when the studio opens on May 6th, visit the links provided in the show notes. I'll be back next week with more inspiring stories, but for now this has been What It's Like with Loose.